So, who profits from war? So this is kind of a weird question, right? Because war is full of death and sadness and awfulness and all this other stuff. And we don't like to think about war as being inherently positive to anyone, right? We think about war as being negative. We think about war as being, something to avoid, the option of last resort. But the truth is, many nations have been at war for much of their existences. And the U.S. is definitely in that camp, who's spent a lot of its time at war. And the question is why, right? Why are there always some kind of conflict or war going on? And the answer is because people are profiting from war. And a lot of times those profiteers have influence about where other wars happen, or they have the ability to influence where other wars happen. So to use the American context, because it's the one I'm most familiar with, there are what are called defense contractors, which is a lovely euphemism that these people have come up with for death corporations, which is effectively what they are, death merchants, or whatever you want to call them. Defense contractor is a fun euphemism that we should not use because it is entirely false. It has nothing to do with our defense. It has everything to do with us acting as an imperialist power around the world. But that being said, who are they, right? And how do they profit from war? So these are these large weapons manufacturers, plane manufacturers. Obviously they're making tanks. They make things for our military and more for our police forces. And this is kind of any type of military gear that you can think of, right? From the weapons, from like rifles and firearms to just regular combat knives, bulletproof vests, even military uniforms, tanks, boats, planes, helicopters, ships, all that stuff, right? All of this manufacturing that goes into making war has to be done by someone, right? And so in the US context, these corporations have sprung up and said, oh, we'll do it, right? We will make the bombs, and we'll make the guns, and we'll make the bullets, and we'll make the battle dress uniforms and all this stuff, right? So every time that we need more of them, the government spends our money as taxpayers to pay them. And essentially there's no regulation that governs how much they can charge us for whatever it is. And there were some great documents that came out. I think they were called the Afghanistan Papers, but I don't know for sure. There were lots of instances where we as taxpayers were being charged crazy amounts for things. I think, if I remember correctly, it was like $5 for a bottle of Coca-Cola, or like $20 for $20 for like a 6-pack or something, like wild, crazy prices. You could even do better than that at American stadiums. But yeah, there were all these examples of the government getting fleeced. And where does that money go, right? Because actually it doesn't cost them that much to manufacture whatever it is they're manufacturing for us. So the people at the top, the capitalists who own these corporations and their shareholders, get rich because there's nothing really checking them. And by the way, part of the reason we know this is because when the Pentagon had its first audit, I believe in 2018, it failed terribly, to the point where they acknowledged that $21 trillion had gone missing, which is a literally unfathomable amount of money. And that money, the likelihood that money disappeared to nowhere is, very low. But the likelihood that money disappeared into the pockets of defense contractors who are regularly getting huge chunks of our massive, quote-unquote, defense spending bill are very high, right? So because no one's checking them, because no one is saying, well, maybe we should set regulations about how much we can be charged for certain military things, we just keep getting told to buy and buy and buy. And even when we're not at war, in the rare instance where we're not at war, now that bribery is legal in America, essentially with campaign contributions, you get to a point where these corporations can buy politicians, and they tell politicians like, oh, you should write us more checks for tanks and things. Even on the other hand, when the military is saying, actually, we have enough tanks, or we have enough whatever it is. I forget what year this happened in, but we bought a bunch of extra military vehicles right after the U.S. military said, we don't want them. Please do not give them to us. But because the politicians who wrote the bill were being bought and paid for effectively by these defense contractors, they did it anyway, right? And we have whole areas of the desert in Nevada where just empty tanks are rusting away because we just keep buying more than we could possibly ever have. And by the way, this is one of the key flaws of capitalism, right? This need to kind of create and create and create and create and create over and over again, even when the thing that's being created isn't necessary. And by the way, each time that we buy something, even if we don't need it, most of that money is going up to the capitalists who own these, death corporations, and they get very, very rich. And so the gravy train just keeps rolling and rolling because they own the whole system over here, right? So that's who profits from war, and that's why you see that there's so much conflict because, and by the way, even before there was money in politics officially, even before America, there was still lots of money to be made in war. For some reason, there has always been this sense that private individuals would make, not always, but for a very long time, there's always been the sense that private individuals would make the weapons and sell the weapons to the government as opposed to the government making them themselves at cost. Now, obviously, it'd be a better world if it was more peaceable and we didn't have, all this war that we were involved in anyway. But for the purpose of our own defense and having weapons in the military and what have you, for better or worse, we have outsourced this incredibly expensive industry to private people who can make profit off it. And because capitalism incentivizes you to continue to make more profit, the prices of these things go up, even though even though things haven't worked. The amount of money we sink in these hasn't worked, but the people on the other end, the capitalists who own these death corporations, just make more and more and more money. And there's no check on it, so it's an endless cycle, unfortunately. And this is just the US context. Similar things are going on in other countries, even other countries that have democratic governments where there's, in theory, a civilian check on the military. Oftentimes that civilian check is writing checks to, weapons manufacturers, tanks manufacturers, and things like that. And at the end of the day, there's a very small group of individuals who are profiting and who are getting to enjoy the benefits of the terrible death and war. So death becomes less of a option of last resort, less of a, we don't want to do this. And it becomes for them the only way they can make money. So if your sons and daughters and brothers and sisters and parents have to die so that someone can make an extra buck on a tank, they'll do it.